what you see here is a simple bar graph, which simply means we're showing you only one data set. Okay, this is a data set that changes across time. So this bar graph is in particular something that tells you what happens over time. When we look at the question about bar graphs, what we want to focus on are, for example, the title of the graph here, the question context, as well as things that you see in the axis, the labeling of the axis. Okay, so let's look at the question context first. The question context typically appears on top of the graph to describe to you what the graph actually means. So in this case, it says it refers to the number of deaths that resulted from drunk driving in Florida, United States from 2010 to 2017. So it tells you the information that's given in the graph, the location this information is in, that is collected from, as well as the time period. Okay, you also see the same information in the title of the graph here. So basically, the title of the graph says alcohol impaired driving fatalities. This part here, the first three words, actually is paraphrased in your question context. Number of deaths that resulted from drunk driving incidents. So the reason why there's a paraphrase in the question context is to help you understand what alcohol impaired driving fatalities mean. Because we don't want to penalize the student for not understanding English during an exam condition. So we offer another way of explaining things to help you understand the data. Technically, you're not faulted for not understanding the title. Okay, so let's look at other elements of this graph here. Fatalities is on the side here. And there is no special unit mentioned in this graph, which means that whatever number you see on the graph is the actual number of deaths related to drunk driving. So in 2010, there are 678, and that's all. It is not 678,000 or million, but just 678. So these are basic elements of the graph and the question context that you should take note of. Moving on to the skill of describing things on a graph. So typically you'll hear your teacher say, please describe the overall trend, then move on to a specific or significant trend, and then talk about the exceptions. So by overall trend, we mean from the start of the time period given to the end of the time period given, what has changed and how has it changed. So in 2010, 678, it became 899 in 2017, which means that the overall trend here is an increase. Start, end, that is called overall trend. Next step, when you go into significant trends or specific trends, that means you're actually picking out very smaller time periods within the overall period and discussing it. Okay, so that means that you pick selected years within the entire time frame here. So for example, what I can do, I will take note of specific years where, for example, the increase is very, very fast or very, very slow. I can do the reverse as well. I can pick years where the decrease is very fast or very slow. I can even pick years where the numbers are the same. Okay, that's what we call significant, because you're trying to highlight something that you took note of in the graph that is special. So one thing I noticed that's special here are these years, 2013 to 2016. Now, why do I say this is special? It's because I notice that the increase is rather quick, is rather significant. These years show the highest increase compared to the rest of the years in the graph. So that could be one significant trend I want to highlight. And take note that I do use adjectives in my answer to highlight that yes, this is significant because the increase is a lot, is very rapid over those few years. What is an exception then? An exception means that which years run opposite to the overall trend. So if the overall trend is an increase, the exception must be a decrease. So where do I find my exceptions? I look at these years. There is a decrease here between 2012 and 2013. There is also a decrease here between 2016 and 2017. So I can pick either time periods to talk about it. So you see that when describing trends, there's actually a lot of room for you to pick which specific years that you want to talk about, as long as you can substantiate it with data shown on the graph. Data meaning the numbers shown on the graph. But one thing that you must write down is the overall trend, the one I highlighted in green at the start of this conversation. Moving on to the next graph. Here, we also see a bar graph, but in this case, this is called a comparative bar graph or comparative bar graph, because it allows me to compare between different sets of data, multiple sets. Here you will see two sets, 2019 and 2020. In other kinds of bar graphs, you might see 3 or even more data sets. So the more data sets given, the more complex the graph becomes. What is also special about this comparative bar graph is that they're not only showing you the difference or changes over time, they're also showing you the changes over time by category. It is what we call a categorical bar graph because they have categorized the data for you. Instead of showing you the total casualties overall, they're showing you the total casualties by the road user type. Are you using a car? Are you using a motorcycle? Are you riding a bicycle? Are you just walking on the street? Okay, so same thing as before. When we look at a graph, we look at the question context here. Number of casualties by road user type in Great Britain in 2019 and 2020. So you notice that you're expected to understand the word casualties, which basically means the total number of injured plus deaths by each road user type. Okay, so when your question context and the title of the graph doesn't really differ much, that means that you're expected to know these terms already. So you see here, the title is about the same. Only a bit of rephrasing here. In Great Britain in 2020 compared with 2019. That's all. Okay, in this case here, if you look at the axis on the left, you'll see the units are in thousands. And it's important that you take note of the units here because it affects the way you support your answer with data. For example, if you were to say that cars here, 89.3 casualties happened in 2019. That is inaccurate because the actual number is 89.3 thousand. So if you're given a 3-mark question in an examination condition, if you quote the wrong units, even if you write the best answer possible, you cannot get your full 3 marks. The marker has the discretion to just give you a maximum of 2 marks because you have failed to understand this component of the graph, which is the units. Okay, so the units are important. Next thing we want to take note about this graph is what kind of categories are there. So clearly there are cars, motorcycles, bicycles, as well as people who are walking. So what kind of questions can be asked about this graph? Typically, when you see different categories here, they would want you to compare between these categories. So you can't really pinpoint an overall trend here because it's just 2 years. But what you can do is you can observe differences between 2019 and 2020. So what differences? For example, you will notice that for cars, in 2019, this number is higher than that of 2020. Same thing, motorcycles, this is higher. Pedal cyclists, this is higher. Pedestrians, this is higher. From there, that's where you get an overall picture of how the number of casualties had changed over time. So what you do know is that across all categories, in 2019, there were higher number of casualties, which means in 2020, the number of casualties actually decreased. Another thing you can look at when you make comparisons is the degree of difference. So for example, 89.3 to 64.3, you see the gap. This is the biggest gap, the biggest decrease that you see compared to all other categories. So cars, you get the greatest decrease. Your pedal cyclists, you get your smallest decrease. So these are elements that you should take note of when looking at a categorical bar graph.